organized by the Department of Political Science, Lomonosov Moscow State University, within the framework of a traditional annual All-Russian Festival of Science. The purpose of this festival is to tell the public in a clear and accessible language, so to speak, what science is, what scientists do, how scientific research improves quality of life, and what prospects it opens for modern people, for the humankind. And so the idea of the festival is to introduce to the achievement of science, provide with first-hand information about what is happening at the forefront of research. The festival slogan is Touch Science. The goal of our session is to tell the public, including those who are non-professionals in political science, not professionals in international relations, what political scientists and IR specialists do. So to share ideas about current global order trends caused by various factors, including COVID-19, that affected tremendously all the countries. And how it affected tremendously all countries, international economics and world politics as well. Okay. I'm delighted to introduce you to our speakers, who are members of the team that was formed and led by Professor Piotr Dudkiewicz, who is also among our speakers, teaching at the joint master degree program, Global Order, Transformations and Challenges, that is conducted since last year by the Department of Political Science at Moscow State University, jointly with the MGIMO University in Moscow. Just a few words about our ground rules. Given limited time, I would like speakers to limit their presentations to 15 minutes. Our chat may be used for questions. And without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, Professor Jan Scholte. I would like to invite our first speaker, Professor Jan Scholte, from the Netherlands, Leiden University, professor of Global Transformations and Governance Challenges, Institute of Security and Global Affairs. Jan, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Artur. Nice to see everyone, or sort of see everyone. Nice that we can do these kinds of conversations and have collective discussions and debate this way, even if it's not ideal. My topic was to ask about global transformations, geopolitical, institutional, and structural. So what I want to do is talk about how the global world is and is not changing in terms of the geographical powers that exist, in terms of the organizations that provide rules and order for a global world, and in terms of the deeper patterns of world order. And I can illustrate all of my points under those three headings with reference to COVID-19. And let's see how we go. In terms of geopolitical changes, people look at today's world and are often remarking at a decline of the United States, a decline of US leadership. And one can see this in many ways in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic at the moment. What kind of leadership has come from Washington, from the United States, in terms of coordinating a global response to a global pandemic? If we compare the situation to the 1940s, with US leadership in creating the multilateral institutions at that time for post-Second World War reconstruction, or in the 1990s, with US leadership, I don't say whether for good or for bad, but certainly US leadership in the 1990s to shape the post-Cold War world, If we look at the situation in the 2020s and COVID-19, then it's hard to compare the United States leadership of today with the situation that we saw in earlier times. The only thing I might say is we have also seen declines of US leadership at other moments in the 1970s, after the Vietnam War, the breakup of the Bretton Woods institutions, the rise at that time of demands for a new international economic order. The US leadership was not as pronounced and stable at that time either. So you might even say in the 1940s, then 30 years later, it was weaker, US leadership. Then in the 1990s, strong again, but 30 years later today, weaker. I guess what I want to say is, let's not anticipate and assume that US hegemony, if we can call it that, in the world order has disappeared or is on decline forever, because that's not necessarily the case. Who knows, with certain shifts, the United States still has by far the largest military resources. The US dollar is still quite central to the global economy. I think we look at the centrality of US-based corporations in the internet sphere and so on and so forth. I think we would be a bit quick to say it's the end of a dominant US geopolitical role in the world today. That said, we are definitely in a world with a rise of BRICS, of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Whether that's a full shift from the so-called North to the so-called South, from the old West to a larger East, again, I would be a little bit cautious to say that that shift is going as quickly and as fully as some people might say. Again, if one looks at COVID-19 at the moment, the technological leadership in developing a vaccine and so on is not centered in India and China, Russia. There are developments there, but the big cartels, the big pharmaceutical company cartels and so on, the big rollout of vaccines is still largely taking place in North America and Europe. And likewise, if one looks in the areas of finance, information, communications, other technologies, artificial intelligence, and so on, a shift from the old powers to the new BRICS powers is maybe not as extreme as people might say. China as an emerging new hegemon, a shift from the United States to China as a hegemonic force, as the leader in global governance. Again, we can certainly see in recent years more assertions from the Chinese government, the Belt and Road Initiative, initiatives to create a new international arbitration court based in Beijing, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the various other steps where the Chinese government appears to take more assertive leadership in global governance. And that is certainly a trend, but it is not yet to the point where you would say China is the leader, the hegemon. Might we instead see a shift to a collective leadership from the G20, the group of 20? Instead of the kind of concert of Europe that one had in the early 19th century, might we move to a concert of the globe amongst the G20? Again, let's see what happens in time. We should also note, though, that the power doesn't always lie entirely with states and countries in today's global world. So maybe one of the even deeper transformations is a move away from power being only geopolitical and territorially based, and instead moving towards other kinds of actors and other kinds of geographies, virtual geographies and non-state actors. But a little bit more on that in a moment. So geopolitical shifts, as I say, decline of the United States, but don't write it off too quickly. Rise of BRICS, but don't exaggerate it. Chinese initiatives in global governance, definitely there, but not yet in a position that you would liken it to the United States in the 1940s. A collective hegemony of the G20, let's see. Turning to the second point about institutional changes, institutional transformations, here I would say that there is a general transformation of recent times, moving away from global governance through multilateral intergovernmental organizations. So if you talked about global governance 30 years ago, you meant multilateral intergovernmentalism. You meant the United Nations system, the World Trade Organization, and other intergovernmental, formal, permanent, multilateral institutions. And if you look at what has been happening in the last two or three decades, the rate of increases of multilateral treaties and arrangements and the rate of growth of multilateral institutions has slowed. In fact, in some cases, it has declined. So in terms of the institutional organizational frameworks for global cooperation, there's a question about how far, what is the future of multilateralism? It doesn't follow that the multilateral institutions are no longer important. The United Nations is still important. The International Monetary Fund is still important. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the demand for global cooperation, the demand for global governance has grown much faster than the multilateral institutions have been able to deliver. And as a result, we see many new kinds of global governing. We see collaborations informally among governments. In the academic language, we call it transgovernmental networks. It means situations where states collaborate with each other informally, not through formal treaty-based organizations like the United Nations, but rather through informal, temporary committees, working parties, commissions, and other informal frameworks. We also see a lot of collaboration developing amongst provinces and amongst cities. I would be very interested in looking at COVID-19 at the moment to see what kind of collaboration is happening between the big cities, because it's Moscow that is affected in such a great deal. It's New York that is affected. It's the big cities, Paris and so on, across New Delhi, across the globe. It's often cities that have to deal with the pandemic even more than the countries as a whole. Are the cities collaborating with each other much more? That would be a different kind of global governance through cities rather than through states. And we see it happening in a number of other areas. We also see a lot of global cooperation through non-state channels. So if we look at how global environmental changes are being greeted, or how the global internet is being governed, or how corporate social responsibility schemes are put together. There are many global rules these days, global institutions, which are not based on states. They're still making rules, but they're not coming from governments. Anyway, in short, we can see a relative decline or stagnation in any case in traditional intergovernmental international organizations. But that does not mean a decline of global governance as a whole. In fact, there's an expansion of overall global governance if you consider these new institutional forms, which unfortunately do not get very much attention in the media or even academic scholarship in some circles. Then lastly, just to ask, are the very foundations of contemporary global order shifting in terms of moving ourselves away from territorial geography to virtual geography, moving ourselves away from a focus on national identities to a much more plural identity landscape? Might we even, stimulated by COVID, might we even begin to think differently about global ecology and say we need to relate humanity to the wider web of life in new ways in order to cope with what we see through the pandemic, but we also see in relation to climate change, in relation to loss of species and extinction, many of the ecological problems that unfold? Might we move to a different kind of ecology in global affairs? These are much bigger transformations, and they would unfold, I think, in a much longer term than the immediate sort of term that we are looking at now. But in short, looking at geopolitics, looking at institutions, looking at deeper structures, there's a lot of change going on in the world. And for those younger people who might be listening to this talk, I think I've seen a lot of transformations happen during the 30 years of my career, and it's been getting faster and faster as time goes on. I suspect that the world that you will live through, those of you who are now studying and have the next 30 years to look forward to, you will probably experience even more and faster change than I've done. And that has already been difficult to cope with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Scholte. You put lots of questions. So there are many more questions than answers we have. And I think that our speakers, and maybe we have time for discussion, so we can ask you questions and ask questions to other speakers. And now I would like to welcome Martin Koch, senior lecturer at Bielefeld University in Germany, to take the floor. The title of Martin Koch's presentation will be Global Challenges and Responses. Please, Martin, you may use PowerPoint presentation if you like.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess I don't need a PowerPoint presentation. I just prepared a talk, and please accept my apologies for the typo in the title. It is, as you've said, Arthur, correctly, Global Challenges and Responses. This is again a proof that writing emails at 2 o'clock in the morning is not always a wise decision. So sorry for the typo. But thank you very much for the invitation and giving me the chance to talk about global challenges and responses. In my recent research, I'm studying the role of G20 in world politics, and I'm starting with an observation from an interview I carried out with a sous Sherpa. Sous Sherpas are the administrative members of G20 countries supporting the preparation of an upcoming meeting or summit. He was afraid, this sous Sherpa I interviewed, he was afraid that the myth of G20 as a forum for crisis diplomacy, a place where you can get things done, because only those people who really matter in the world, like in the words of Helmut Schmidt, a former German chancellor, will fade away. He was complaining about G20 losing its focus on economic and financial issues, as it is taking up more and more issues such as health, environment, women empowerment, labor issues, etc. So he was really worried about G20 losing its myth or its status as a forum for crisis diplomacy. At the end of this interview, which was about 1.5 years ago, at the end of this interview, he was somehow thinking loudly and saying, maybe we need a new crisis to underpin the relevance of G20 and show that it can really get things done. Today, I would love to call him back, this sous Sherpa, and tell him now is the time. Now is the time for multilateralism. Besides the problems and crises that we are facing for quite some time now, such as poverty and hunger, with more than 2.3 billion people having less than $2 per day, or the increase of refugees and migrations due to conflict zones, with more than or about 80 million refugees in 2019, new problems arise, such as climate change, which is of course not a new problem, but what is new, however, is the speed of global warming, melting polar ice, and natural disasters. Experts recently concluded that this decade now is the decisive, whether we can stop or at least slow down climate change or not. Finally, the corona crisis, with about 40 million people infected with the virus and about 1.1 million people died with COVID-19. The corona crisis exacerbates the aforementioned crises, such as poverty or migration. I think Martin Geiger will talk about this afterwards, as poor people or migrants are more seriously affected by the virus. And this is something somehow new, that with the corona crisis and climate change, everybody is more or less affected by the crisis. It is not just the poor people or not that just the rich people. Everybody is affected, somehow to different degrees, that's true. But nevertheless, this is a crisis for each and everybody. The question is, how can we respond to these crises or challenges? The last years might seem as a rise of nationalism, with nationalist movements or even parties in many, in particular, Western countries. But what we know since at least 30 years, since the increase of global governance studies, is that one state cannot solve these problems. Even if it's the most powerful state in the world, it won't be possible, or he won't be able to solve the crises ahead. The crisis showed that states alone cannot solve the problems. There needs to be concerted action, not just among states, but among various actors in world politics. G20 can be of crucial importance in this, this map of multilateralism, because it can develop a political roadmap and create a legitimate international body to tackle the problems, not as a hegemony, but as an organizing committee that helps to create global order. The creation of a legitimate international body involves some main goals, including representation, effectiveness, a governance system, and the ability for the leaders to form coalitions to act. The objective of setting up an international body is to provide strategic guidance, vision, and leadership. Therefore, when the G20 leaders meet to address a specific global issue, they should set up a steering committee that would coordinate the efforts and provide guidance and support, keeping in mind who are the different stakeholders in order to involve them in the process and to take into consideration the global changes and developments, be they demographic, economic, technological, or others. Representation stands out as one of the main factors when setting up a new international body or reforming an existing one. It is important to give equal voice to all the member states to express their views and concerns, and to involve in the conversation representatives of relevant international organizations and civil society, as well as think tanks and research scientists, in order to enrich the outcome document and broaden the pool of ideas. Representation also means inclusivity, because that will also affect effectiveness. The earlier in the process an inclusive approach is followed, the better, because the impact of the different policy options introduced will also be considered by all sides, thus minimizing future obstacles or resistance. Bringing citizens actively on board in the design and implementation of policies could also increase their legitimacy and effectiveness and create the feeling of ownership by citizens. The engagement of citizens and stakeholders helps to access knowledge about needs, solutions, and impacts that could otherwise be overlooked. Effectiveness of the steering committee is in the sense of transparency and accountability when reviewing reports, performing tasks and mandates, and assigning responsibility. In this regard, they need to have joint clear goals and objectives with measurable results, and follow up on the allocation and use of resources and the plans for implementation in order to provide guidance and support. A governance system is the establishment of policies and means of monitoring the implementation of the joint goals and objectives by the different stakeholders, so that the steering committee members can evaluate the progress made, readjust the process if necessary, and report regularly to the G20 leaders. During this process, external experts, civil society, and public engagement could also be involved to instill ownership and responsibility. Again, inclusiveness is of central importance here. An inclusive process at this stage creates better circumstances for making informed public policy decisions. Involving the different segments of society in the monitoring and evaluation would lead to a more accurate and realistic view of the situation, thus enable the decision makers to make a better and acceptable decision and reduce the inequalities of opportunity and benefit. And against this background, the crisis and problems are also an opportunity to revival of multilateralism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Koch. You mentioned, or you bring us our attention to a very important issue of international coordination of responses to global challenges, and maybe still this discourse about global governance or world government is will be revitalized in a way. It's a very important issue. Thank you. I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, Dr. Martin Geiger, Deputy Secretary General of the Alliance of Global Talent Organizations, Associate Professor of Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada, and member of the Steering Committee of the International Metropolis Project. Dr. Geiger will talk about COVID-19 and global labor migration. Please, Martin.
Hello, thanks for having me on this conference. And of course, this topic, I thought today to bring a practical example and a case study. And I think it's very nicely connecting to the previous two talks, really awesome, terrific talks. So COVID-19 really impacts everyone. And we are here sitting mostly as experts now, and also international students might be joining, and we are all affected in a particular way by COVID-19 because travel is severely impacted, is restricted, is not possible. Talent mobility of academics is not possible at the moment, and so on. So, sorry about that. Oh, 1 second, I have a problem here. Human migration and mobility was always a key driving of economic integration and progress and transformation, obviously. Was labor migration ever managed well? Did it always to lead to win-win situation? Was there ever a just equal order? Clear answer, no. But labor migration and mobility of workers is really a key component of globalization, and is also closely connected to international order, how we are used to have order, because we live still in a world that is dominated by states, and we have this term of international mobility and migration. Migration mobility really contests the given order or the used order we are used to, so much to, that states exist and that states actually are in power to impact and to restrict and to order migration, this transnational process. Migration and mobility are powerful processes. They are driving ordering in a way, and they lead themselves to reordering, but they're also resulting from. So if a state collapses, we have usually refugee movements, we have migration flows, and so on. So both is very much intertwined. And I recently contributed to this book on hegemony and world order, and COVID-19 came afterwards, and of course would necessitate to write the whole book perhaps again. My chapter in this book focused on international organizations in migration politics as one of the hegemons perhaps that have been of increasing importance in the field of migration and in other fields of politics, as we have heard. And international organizations, a project I was working on for quite some time with Martin Koch. So international organizations are really involved in observing trends, in observing also existing orders, and then also observing the changes. So currently a lot of international organizations are reporting on the impacts of COVID-19, what's happening in the world, and they try again also to bring relevant stakeholders together. They are also usually involved in restoring order, in shaping order, in, for example, peace building and re-establishing order in countries, and with their knowledge, expertise, know-how, very significantly contribute to the creation of order. In my current project of global mobility of talent is an example where we try to bring together relevant stakeholders that include not only states, but business organizations, immigrant settlement organizations, and a lot of other stakeholders for research. We analyze usually the existing policies, the strategies, what did work, what did not work, what can be enhanced. And we are observing in this way existing orders also at a multi-scalar level. So starting from the city level up to the top of the global level, and what changes have been brought about by economic interests to attract and retain talent for economic growth. So from this research, we can say that very few countries really manage talent mobility well and are indeed successful. Canada is often brought as an example, as a poster child, basically, of well-managed talent mobility, high-skilled migration. But if you look very close, it's actually not, and there are a lot of gaps still and a lot of insufficiencies. At the same time, more and more countries really depend on well-managed and continued talent flows. And even before COVID-19, we had an increasing talent war, competition over international talent, and many states around the world and economies and companies and so on grappled really with the question how to implement and contain order to effectively attract and retain talent. But also how to respond to changes, to regular changes, to incremental changes, but also to shocks. Let's say the Trump presidency imposing severe limitations on labor mobility. Of course, COVID-19 is now a very particular different shock, and we talk about this in a second. Talent flows and dependence on talent flows indeed really remain under-researched. And the problem starts really with our knowledge about it. So quantitative, we have a lot of typologies, indexes, and so on. Qualitative, we have some insights, what different stakeholders are doing. And there seems to be a continued long-standing problem that talent everywhere in the world is actually underutilized. There's a lack of credential recognition in many cases. Also a wrong use and even an exploitation of high-skilled migrants that is occurring, and this topic that is widely known as brain drain or skill drain, and so on. So order and global mobility of talent, we have also in this field long-standing, longer discussions already, how to govern migration mobility. And there's always this notion of the missing regime. So migration is actually one of these missing regimes where we currently or still do not have a global framework that is binding on migration. There have been several attempts, 90s and 2000s, saw a lot of conferences at the UN level, regional levels, grappling with this question, how to construe actually a world order on migration. And the most recent attempt was the Global Compact on Migration, which is, however, importantly, is non-binding. And if you look at these objectives, labor migration is very often coming up in these objectives and talked about in this Global Compact. However, the real outcome and the realization of this Global Compact really is currently a burning question, because COVID-19 just happened right after this compact was actually ratified or put in place. So businesses around the world have been in need for better regulatory frameworks. They are asking for that. Also governments were asking for this better framework for a global order and talent mobility. And now COVID-19 occurred, an unbelievable, something we never expected, game changer. We have a lightning speed of changes. We have rapidly imposed restrictions on travel and talent flows that we have never imagined how quickly they worked this out. Lockdowns, but also lockouts of students, of international professionals that are actually not able to travel and to migrate anymore. And there are very few exceptions, including healthcare workers that basically were lured to the US, for example, by Donald Trump, and actually exempted from some regulations, right? And there are very few exemptions, but around the world, especially also in Asia, cities, countries are really grappling with this question now, how to relaunch successfully talent migration. We have done a lot of conversations on this topic over the recent months, because we see that talent migration right now in COVID-19 is really at a watershed moment. We need new collaboration, a new kind of collaboration. However, the situation is so complex. At the same time, it's so urgent, because one of the key components of relaunching economies around the world will be the question of travel and mobility of talent and talent workers. So many stakeholders really asking for this order. At the same time, there's this risk that there might be a complete Wild West reshuffle and even more brutal talent war, competition over talent. So in lifting of the restrictions and the return of talent, actually China is now stepping forward and already leading by allowing certain professionals to return, by allowing international students to come again, and has actually already gained an advantage over other countries in attracting talent. There have been new talent development tools of talent attraction, but we have also seen significant changes to work arrangement, how employment is done. However, here, the work of high-skilled professionals is not so easily transferable to virtual work only. So this is a key issue. So why perhaps for some talents, there will be no work left in a few years. Some other talents have more choices. At the same time, they are much more vulnerable in this period now. Employers at one point become more powerful. However, most employers are also extremely weak already and dependent on talent, and also can offer economically less to talent. So the states are called for their help again in actually providing subsidiaries and other help that make a country then actually attractive again, if the country or the companies cannot provide this support anymore. And there's a great confusion right now among governments and international organizations how to bring about order again in this field. So we have been presenting the last few years at the Paris Peace Forum some new initiative, which is actually leading to an international organization on talent mobility. And this year, Paris Peace Forum, I'm invited again, but as you can see, this digital invitation is not an invitation to attend on site. It will be totally virtual again. But at this event, we're gonna launch a new international non-governmental platform that is a result from the Paris Peace Forum, and in a way very nicely relates to the previous talks and how perhaps to envision a new organization to bring stakeholders together to exchange advice, practices. This is our hope. But of course, we are also now overwhelmed with this pandemic. There's a very strong interest in this new organization from business side and from government. But at the same time, we are of course also grappling with this question, how to restart and relaunch economies worldwide. Thank you very much for your attention and your questions later on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thank you so much, Dr. Geiger, for bringing our attention to a very important issue that affects our academic community as well. And I guess that despite of all viruses, no virus can stop movement and academic exchanges and movement of talents across the globe. And the key to the solution of all the problems are innovative. Sorry, I might have disconnected. The key to solving many problems is to find innovative solutions, find new creative solutions, and it's those solutions can be found by talented people, including former students. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, professor of Moscow State University, Department of Political Science, Piotr Dudkiewicz, Professor and Director, Center for Governance and Public Management at Carleton University in Ottawa in Canada, and a member of Valdai Club. Please, Piotr, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arthur. I would like to thank my colleagues that join us today as well. It was a fascinating introduction to so many topics by our three speakers. My presentation is a rather small glossa, sort of addition to this debate that we started today. It's about the struggle of two factions, of two elite factions, about the power domination that to me will lead, the outcome of the struggle would lead somehow to the reformulation of globalization. Let me start with a picture that I have in mind after reading the debate about different representatives of the financial and regional industrial capital about COVID-19. And what pushed me to this presentation was the interesting statement by President of France, Emmanuel Macron, who says that the future is the future will be the outcome of the struggle between the progressivists and national populists. That's how he characterized the current state of the battle of who will be shaping and reshaping post-COVID-19 world. So my first point is the story of the two groups. One group, I will call them one elite group, large elite group. I will call them financial elite or global financial capital representatives. They are most of them, they are bankers, those who are providing finances, managers of the big financial companies, mutual funds, but also managers of the IT companies and managers of the internet networks, journalists, artists, and so on and so forth. People who, in short, believe in the changes of the inevitable changes and transformation of the current world, of getting rid of the old patterns of behavior, of the patterns, pre-capitalist and capitalist patterns related to the certain belief in the traditional model of industrial development, believing in the certain traditional values of family, traditional understanding of property, and so on and so forth. And it's another group that are represented, what I call them as regionalist industrialists. This elite group is composed of big entrepreneurs and those who support it, but also by the state apparatus that is working closely with the industrial business in order to make them produce. As a state bureaucracy that makes workers more or less supported with education, with health services, and so on and so forth. There are also quite a huge machine of those who are making industrial production working. Not only workers, but the whole bureaucracy and managers, but also journalists, and I think a lot of churches are also belong to this group of traditionally looking Abrahamic based values. And these groups, my second point is that these groups, historically speaking, were somehow working together for the last 50, 60 years. They were expanding and introducing this golden age for business by cooperating with each other. So the industrialists were looking for the financial elite to support them with the capital necessary for expansion, and then financial capital was ready to provide them with this support, and then taking quite a big profit. So they were not without competing, but they were somehow in the deep symbiotic relations. My third point is that something is happening for the last 20 years or maybe more. Jan Scholte will correct me if I am wrong, but from the political economy perspective, what's happening is that financial capital is trying to prevail, is trying to be in the driving seat of globalization, of the new type of progress, based not on the traditional values and traditional production chain and supply, but rather on the subordinating them to the completely new logic of financial capital. This logic which leads to capital taking powerful positions, maybe even as Jonathan Nitzan and Shimshon Bichler suggested, capital becoming capitalist power. So this is the first point. And the fourth point is COVID-19. And then you see the different type of responses from these two elite groups to COVID-19, two types of responses of what shall be done, how to react to COVID. And now financial capital is taking the role of creating world management or regional management by fear, by press manipulation, by saying that we're the only way to get out of this problem is to lock down, sit at home, and work online. Another group is quite opposite. They are saying, yes, they are dangerous. Everything is very dangerous, but we should produce. We should provide services. We should go to our factories, work on the pits, and sell and provide food, and so on and so forth. So no lockdown. Let's try to survive using much less oppressive from the point of view of the industrial capital measures. And they are pitched against each other. So my point is, my fourth point is, the pandemic revealed what we call the true colors of each part of the global elite. And these true colors are showing how the goals, intentions, and strategies are very much different from each other. So they are now becoming engaged in the very ferocious struggle with each other. One group is advocating for sustaining industrial development based regionally, obviously. And then the industrial group are saying, well, to this end, we need state support. We need workers being supported by the different welfare programs. We need support for this people with education that will be specialized enough in order to work in the pits and factories and produce the things. And another group is saying, well, this is no longer as important as many see. Labor can be much cheaper because there are a lot of people who are redundant in this world, and a lot of labor is redundant in this world. Why to invest in the labor? Why to invest in the social security programs? Why to invest in the welfare state? Why we can move the productive assets from one place to another and pitch them against each other in order to lower the price of production. So in other words, you have not only a debate about the model of development in the post-COVID model of development, but you are dealing with the interesting struggle for the new world of values. One value, those people who are advocating or they are in the financial group, they would like to introduce a new universal values, the value of human rights, the values of diversity, the values, identity values, and so on and so forth. And industrialists are saying, well, we need more diversity because the business of production and extraction are much more regionally based. And we need more multilateralism because this will reflect the different civilizational base of our industries, and so on and so forth. So this is not only about the form of capital they will dominate, but also about the struggle, about the new and versus old traditional values that we are seeing around. So to conclude, I believe that we are dealing with something more important than COVID. We're dealing with something more important than current fear about our family and ourselves. We're dealing with a ferocious, very deep confrontation of different groups globally, two groups globally, and the future of globalization as we know it will very much depend on this struggle. And then we should probably will be able to look closely to what is globalization, what kind of the definition we will be using. And I am so glad that among us is Jan Schulte, who started this debate on the redefinition of globalization many years ago with his article in 2002, when he was trying to dissect the 4 formulas for globalization or defining globalization of liberalization, westernization, internationalization, and universalization, and he proposed a new approach which was dealing with the supra-territorial connectivity as a base for the new definition of globalization. Then came other definitions. Among them, what I like very much was Nitzan and Bichler definition of commodification of social relations as a new approach to globalization. And now I think it's the time to maybe look at the definition which will be talking about the financialization of social relations as a future of the new global and the new global phase. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Dudkiewicz. Your talk was not very optimistic though, but you mentioned very important things, that our world is now facing new types of conflicts, or maybe reemergence of old conflicts related to capital and labor. And we all are now living through a very serious period, and this period can be regarded as a stress test for all the countries. It's a stress test for state capacities, not only for healthcare systems. It's a stress test for the current model of production, model of economic development. It's a stress test for political elites, for those who make decisions, who stress test for the governance at the regional level, the national level. And also it's a stress test for our sets of values. Which values will survive this crisis, COVID crisis, or which values will be rejected? But every time we have some events in the world that we consider to be the most important, that attract our attention. And one of those events is only several weeks away, and in less than a month, we will watch and observe and follow news about the election in the United States, and we are now watching debates or following debates between presidential candidates in the United States. And I would like to invite, and it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is a graduate alumnus of Moscow State University, professor of international relations and political science at San Francisco State University, Dr. Andrei Tsigankov. Andrei Pavlovich, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Artur. Thank you very much. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you for invitation. It's a pleasure to be a part of this excellent group. My talk, as Artur has already previewed, is directly about the United States politics and the extent to which this politics affects global transition, global transformation, by way of discussing US-Russia relations. So what I'd like to do, and I will make it a little bit easier by sharing my screen with you, is to go over some of the images of Russia in the United States elections, and then addressing specifically how these elections are going to affect US-Russia relations after these elections, and therefore the international transition, to the extent that it continues to be shaped, informed by the United States policies and role in the international system. Now, in the US context, each time I discuss it for the benefits of my students and others, I begin with several key points that Russia remains critically important in the international system for multiple reasons. All of these reasons are clear to you. It's easy to go over this list and even extend it. Russia is a nuclear power. It's absolutely crucial that it cooperates with respect to non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. It has been extremely active in the struggle with terrorism globally and regionally. It is actively participating and influencing different regions by providing stability in several regions or contributing to this stability. It holds the seat at the United Nations Security Council, so it certainly is crucially important in politics of the international system, international order, and it's involved in multiple other globally significant issues that include cybersecurity, energy security, and others. Russia has been also significant over the last several years, in particular in the United States context. It has been mostly critically assessed, primarily by the media, by the mainstream media and the political class. It has been viewed as a leading force in interfering in the United States elections. There have been multiple investigations, particularly ever since Donald Trump was elected president. There were all kinds of charges that were initiated and against Russia. We can go over the list, but you probably are quite familiar with these stories from the media, from the global media. These are some of the key charges in front of you, that Russia is a leading authoritarian power. It is now viewed as the leader of the axis of authoritarianism alongside China, Iran, Venezuela, and others. It's involved in oppressing opposition at home and poisoning opponents of Putin's regime at home and abroad. It has all kinds of other dark arts, as some scholars put it. It has perfected from cyber war to information war. More recent charges include the one that Russia has been involved in bounty killings of American soldiers in Afghanistan, which has not been confirmed by Pentagon and National Security Agency, but it has been floating around anyway. So I'll come back to this point. So overall, you have, I would say, two very important images in the US political and media segments. First, both of them are rivals. Both of them view Russia as a very important rival of the United States. But one of them, specifically associated with the Democratic Party, is that Russia is not only a rival, but it's an adversary. It's essentially an existential threat. And the United States must confront this number one threat first and foremost. China is important as well, but it is Russia that constitutes the most important threat. And the second image is that Russia is a competitor. It has a potential for cooperation, and it may be even a partner on our terms, on junior terms. So these are the images that roughly can be assessed as held by Democratic Party and by Republican Party. How are we to explain these perceptions, particularly that Russia became a rival, even an existential threat, ever since the Cold War ended? Well, the first one has already been articulated by several scholars and speakers, including some today, that we are going through a fundamental global transition, power transition, in which rivalry is a very important characteristic. Rising powers have important stakes in this struggle. They often diverge in their values and interests. And that, of course, is a very important reality that we must accept, and the United States is a part of this struggle. But the other one is also significant, that the United States itself is going through an identity struggle. It's a different political stage of development, and it is in search for others. And political polarization reflects also polarization of cultural perceptions, polarization of identities with very different others. And you have a competition of at least two different approaches. One indicates the search for global leadership as associated with Democrats. They continue to believe that they will be able to restore the world for America. And the other one is nationalism, the image of America first. It's no longer globalist perception, it's the idea of domination. So Joe Biden is the one who represents the idea of global leadership and liberal world order, revival of liberal world order, with commitment to United States alliances, including in Europe, but in Asia as well, with commitment to economic openness and human rights. He continues to believe that the United States is leading the world and will continue to lead the world. Here is one quote for you to illustrate this thinking. From his article published earlier this year in Foreign Affairs, Why America Must Lead. We must once more harness that power and rally the free world to meet the challenges facing the world today. It falls to the United States to lead the way. No other nation has that capacity. No other nation is built on that idea. So that's the view of the shining city on the hill, if you will, the older Wilsonian tradition of the United States and the United States foreign policy. It has many predecessors. It has been the dominant idea ever since the United States emerged as a powerful country. And it has been the dominant idea after the end of the Cold War. On Russia, therefore, Biden is of conviction that it constitutes the dominant other, the most important alternative perspective on the world, the most important opposition to his views. And so he views Putin as the spoiler, as the most important spoiler of the United States designed ambitions, liberal ambitions for the world, as the negative other, as the important constituent negative other through which the United States defines itself, defines its own identity of a free country and the leader of the free world. That is reinforced in his mind by the fact that it's a former Cold War enemy, and we are now in the stage of second Cold War, which Biden and others believe that Putin launched against the United States. It is now led by the former KGB spy and authoritarian power. And so you have all kinds of highly exaggerated claims by Democrats, including that Russia attacked the United States in the 2016 presidential elections in the manner of September the 11th, when the United States was attacked by terrorists, or in the manner of Pearl Harbor, when, of course, the United States was also attacked by another foreign power. That's the perception. When it comes to Russia, this is the passage that also gives you an idea of where Biden stands. Putin, quote, wants to tell himself and anyone else that he can dupe into believing him that the liberal idea is obsolete. But he does so because he's afraid of its power. So it's from the same Foreign Affairs article. And if you read it closely, actually, then you will see that this particular passage just immediately precedes the earlier statement that Biden, in which Biden announces that no other nation has the capacity to lead the world. So this is really a mirror image mentality, us versus them mentality. Either we prevail or they will crush us, as Joseph Stalin might say at a different time. And that's why Putin is viewed as someone who is behind Trump, someone who not only helped Trump, but in fact has Trump as his proxy in the White House, Trump as Putin puppet, as Biden put it in one of his debates, someone who is responsible for bounty killings in Afghanistan, someone who is even sabotaging the peace process in Azerbaijan-Armenia recent war that continues to be active today. That's the perception on Biden's part. When it comes to Trump, it's radically different. It's radically difficult because it's not globalist. The idea is that we must project power across the world. It's the old idea of peace through strengths, through economic strengths, through military strengths. And when it comes to allies, European allies, Asian allies, all allies must pay their dues. It's a transactional approach. We will connect with them. We will provide some services, security services, but in exchange for their economic services, and they must be aware of their dues as well. It's a protectionist philosophy. It's a philosophy of making deals with the world, or as Trump put it, bargains with the world. It's the idea that America must dominate rather than lead the world. It's the idea of nationalism, the old style nationalism that has to do with another tradition in American history that is associated with General Andrew Jackson. I would call it a hegemonic nationalism, and Trump is a very typical representative of that approach given the circumstances. When it comes to Russia, he views and has viewed Russia as a potential junior partner, as a partner that will follow the United States policies, particularly against China. His negative other is not Russia. His negative other is China. China is #1 threat. He certainly has developed chemistry with Vladimir Putin. They share not only some sympathy towards each other, but they share some ideas, the ideas that can be described as great power nationalism. And therefore, Trump has been quite soft on Putin when it comes to his rhetoric. He overall has not criticized Russia's political system. He has not personally, never personally attacked Putin. He said that he wants to get along with Russia on multiple occasions. But that's rhetoric. And when it comes to rhetoric, this is where he may be viewed as a ally or partner of Vladimir Putin. And he has been faulted and harshly criticized for that by Democrats. But the reality is the foreign policy of Donald Trump towards Vladimir Putin, towards Russia, is quite different, is quite tough. In foreign affairs, Trump has abandoned very important nuclear treaties that Russia has been supportive for years. He has walked away from the Iran deal. He has attacked the Nord Stream project with Germany that is now being discussed widely in Europe as well. He has supplied lethal weapons for Ukraine. He has authorized cyber attacks against Russia. He has been demonstrating power and domination, and he wants to get along with Russia, as he puts it, but only on his terms. So since I only have limited time, let me conclude that the future of US-Russia relations, given this rhetoric, is quite bleak, and the future of the world with it is also quite bleak, as it is influenced by the United States. We are entering a very difficult stage of international relations, of international system. Whoever wins in these elections, Trump or Biden, will create multiple problems for US-Russia relations. Biden, again, to summarize, views Russia as an existential threat. It will be extremely difficult to get along with the United States if it is led by Joe Biden. Trump views Russia as a competitor and junior partner, and it turns out to be the case that Russia is not attractive to this option either. It does not want to be a junior partner. It has already been a junior partner in the 90s. It rejected it. It wants to have relationships based on common interests, based on common perception of threat, based on common understanding of what an international system and world order should be. So, and it continues to have a considerable power. It's asymmetric, but considerable to challenge that perception. And Russia has already demonstrated its capacity, political and military capacity on multiple occasions. I'm not just talking about new military capabilities such as hypersonic power, but I'm also talking about intelligence operations, about cyber capacity that Russia has, about different abilities to influence regional security and regional environment. So it continues to have and will continue to have, as a major power in the world, sufficient capital to obstruct United States plans for global order, whatever those plans might be. But in the meantime, the real issues will not be addressed. The real issues that have to do with international security, regional security, cyber security, energy stability will be, unfortunately, a hostage of this power struggle. And we will learn through crisis. United States and Russia will continue to go through multiple international crises that will affect all of us, and they will learn only from those crises. And their cooperation will be limited to possibility of preventing this further escalation. So there will be a period of time, probably for several decades, when things will get worse before they will get better. I guess we'll get to questions after we are finished with presentations. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Andrei Pavlovich. From your talk, we get an impression that whoever wins the relations between United States and Russia will not become better or worse. They will be not as good as they could be, but both candidates, they have very special attitude to Russia and use Russia for their own advantage in their campaigning. And I recall a very funny poster. I don't know whether it was fake or real. It was in New York City, and there was a huge billboard with just a poster, "Vote because Russian lessons are expensive." So they use Russia as a threat to encourage people to vote and to vote for Joe Biden, of course. And it's a coincidence, but our final presentation that was announced in our program was prepared jointly by Associate Professor of our Department of Political Science, Yelena Khudarenko, and Doctor of Philology, Professor, Head of Department of Russian Language and History of Literature from Moscow Polytechnic University, Sergei Sergeyevich Hromov. And I think that Sergei Sergeyevich will present on behalf of both of them. So please, Sergei Sergeyevich, the floor is yours.
Sergei Sergeyevich, can you hear us? Sergei Sergeyevich.
I'm here.
Yeah, okay, the floor is yours, please. I just announced your presentation.
Can you see my presentation?
Not yet. Please press green button. Sharing your screen. Демонстрация экрана.
See.
Green button. Демонстрация экрана.
I see. Well, I'll start I'll show it later. Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome all our colleagues, and I'm very happy to receive such an honorable invitation to take part in our joint session, in our joint online project. And my report is a joint report, as we've already announced. And I would like to greet you on behalf of two departments of two universities, Lomonosov State University and Moscow Polytechnic University. And my report is devoted to Russian language in the global communication system. First of all, I would like to start with the preface to the monograph that was issued in 2007 by Max Skidmore and Andrew Klein. Its headline is Politics and Language. And in the preface, we can read, "The power of words over politics, although occasionally noted, is too often forgotten or ignored. In ways they are direct or indirect, subtle or obvious, words and language exert influence on political action." Well, these words, are quite clear, and we cannot disagree with these words. We can only agree, because the real languages or language, particularly this or that one, words, sentences, exert great influence on politics, on political actions. And globalization, as we know, is one of the leading trends in modern communication, which reflects the integration processes in general. And one of the decisive importance here belongs to language, belongs to languages. In our case, will discuss the Russian language in the world and particularly in the post-Soviet space. Well, we can say that language can play different roles. Language can act as a factor activating or weakening integration processes. The second, language can act as a factor on which the preservation of a social, cultural, educational post space depends on. And what is the place of the Russian language in modern global communication and in post-Soviet countries in particular? Several trends can be distinguished here. Well, the first, there is a reduction in the geography of the use of the Russian language in the international space, and consequently in global communication. Well, and we can say that, for example, the total number of those who spoke Russian, well, at the end of the 20th century ranged from 350 million to 500 million people. At present, Russian ranks only the 8th place in terms of prevalence. Well, as the Speaker of the Upper House of the Russian Parliament, Valentina Matvienko, said, unfortunately, we have not been able to stop the trend of narrowing the area of the Russian language in the world. Since the end of the last 20th century, the number of people who speak Russian has decreased in the world by several tens of millions of people. The second point we should consider, so the first point is the geography of the Russian language and its reduction. The second point is the legal status of the Russian language in neighboring states. So we can say that Russian now becomes an object of discrimination aimed at ousting it from all spheres of society in neighboring post-Soviet states. Let's consider the legal status of Russian in neighboring states, neighboring post-Soviet states. Well, it is a state language only in both countries, in Russian Federation and Belarus. While it is declared as an official language in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. In such countries as Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, it isn't fixed. For example, in Moldova and Tajikistan, it is recognized as a language of only international communication. In Ukraine, well, it is declared, it is stated as a language of the national minority. Well, in Armenia, Latvia, and Estonia, it is considered to be only a foreign language. Only a foreign language. Well, the third issue we should pay our attention to is the transition of Cyrillic alphabet to Latin alphabet. Well, it's a living process that occurred and is occurring in post-Soviet states. Well, as an example, we can submit here such countries as Moldova, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, where we can witness the transition of the Cyrillic alphabet to the Latin alphabet. Well, Kazakhstan is the most recent example, and where the transition of Cyrillic alphabet to Latin alphabet is taking now place. Well, if we consider such a fact, we can say that what is the threat of transition from one Cyrillic alphabet to Latin alphabet? Well, at the first view, there is no danger, but we can say that it can lead to duplication of many documents in both alphabets, in Cyrillic and Latin. We can say that it leads to the weakening of ties with Russian culture and the Russian language. And it's an interesting fact that such a transition from Cyrillic alphabet to Latin alphabet, although occurred, for example, if you remember, in the USSR in the 20s of the last century. Well, after the October Revolution of 1917, well, it was an attempt occurred just in the late 20s and it was planned to translate Russian Cyrillic to Latin alphabet. It happened in 1929 when a commission was formed to develop the issue of transition of the Russian Cyrillic alphabet into Latin. But fortunately, the commission completed its work in January 1930. So the work on Romanization of the Russian alphabet was discontinued. Then the next issue we should pay attention to. It is the reduction of the Russian-speaking population in neighboring post-Soviet countries. Changing in the status of the Russian language contribute to the growth of migration processes in these countries, the outflow of Russian-speaking citizens. And it's a fact, for example, that Kazakhstan, which has had the largest number of Russian-speaking people since the collapse of the USSR, now is currently the leader in migration of the Russian-speaking population. A similar situation is observed in other post-Soviet countries of the nearest abroad. Well, the fifth issue we should pay attention to while considering this question is the status of the Russian language in neighboring countries depends largely on the size of the Russian-speaking community in a particular country.
Sergey Sergeyevich, I am sorry to remind you about our time limits.
I remember. Well, it is the size of the Russian-speaking community in particular country. The sixth item we should pay attention to is the widespread displacement of the Russian language from the social, political, scientific, and educational spheres, from the spheres of communication in almost all post-Soviet countries, And the seventh issue we should pay attention to, the pandemic situation with COVID-19 has had a negative impact on the situation with the Russian language as well as other languages. Many important international events, forums, symposiums, meetings in Russian have been cancelled or converted to internet communication. Living communication has to be converted into internet communication, which has quite different laws of regulating words and sentences. Well, just winding up, I should say, at the same time, it should be noted that Russian remains one of the most popular language of inter-ethnic, intercultural, interstate communication among the post-Soviet countries. The need for Russian as a language of culture, science, education, and innovation is evident at a high level. Russian is a significant issue that we are discussing today at the Lomonosov Moscow State University, the founder of which, Professor Lomonosov, put so much effort into making Russian the language of education and the language of science in Russia. So thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Sergei Sergeyevich. Indeed, nowadays, language policies or promoting language becomes one of the state priorities in terms of soft power. So language promotion is considered to be one of the means of soft power of the country. Because with language, we transmit our culture, we transmit our values, and modern governments consider that and think it's very important. All our speakers who were announced, who prepared their presentations, had a chance to make their presentations. So now we have time for questions and a sort of discussion. So if we have any questions from the audience or from speakers to each other, please, you are welcome to ask questions or make comments about what you heard. Please feel free to ask questions and make brief, very comments, but please not more than a couple of minutes for comment, of course. Please, colleagues, do we have questions or comments? I don't see, surprisingly, I don't see any questions or comments to what was said. Does it mean that we are coming to an end of our discussion?
No, I have a question to Professor Scholte.
Yes, Peter, please.
Jan, I would like to ask you about your prediction about the depth of changes that are brought by pandemic. Do you feel that the life will look more or less normal and the changes will be not as fundamental as some claim, or other there will be a bit deeper? In the 3 dimensions you mentioned in your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Piotr. I think when we are in the middle of moments like this, we anticipate that everything is going to change so much. And in the global financial, so-called global financial crisis, I would say actually it was the transatlantic financial crisis, but whatever. In 2007, 2008, we were told that economy would never be the same again. And even economists would never do economics as they had done before. And in the global migration crisis of 2015, 2016, we were also told, oh, we will never treat migration the same way, and so on and so forth. So so I hesitate. When we are in the middle of the moment, we imagine that everything will turn around. We will never fly on airplanes again. We will never travel. We will permanently be online for these kinds of meetings. Let's see. I think once the vaccines are around, I can't imagine that we will prefer this kind of meeting with each other. I think we would much rather sit around a table together. I certainly it will be a disruption. Certainly it will be, but will we get a new economy with fundamentally different post-capitalist structures? Will we completely change our engagement with the environment? Part of me hopes so, because I think it would be a creative and perhaps better society as a personal normative comment, but I think change goes more slowly.
Thank you, Jan. As far as I know, in China, crisis is depicted by a sign that combines 2 very simple signs. One is danger, threat, another one is opportunity. So the idea of crisis is to overcome or avoid risks and dangers and use all the opportunities it brings to us. Any other questions, dear colleagues or dear students who joined us? Yes, Martin, please.
Thank you. I've actually one comment and one question. A comment to what Jan and Scholt just said. I totally agree, and I would say let's see and let's wait for another, say, 1 or 2 years until this crisis is settled, hopefully settled. And I guess that, for example, traveling will rise again, but I would rather doubt that we have the same amount of traveling that we had before the Corona crisis in, let's say, the next 5 years or so, because all the airlines now, well, some of them shut down. At least they don't have so many airplanes that they used to have before. So I rather doubt that we will have the same amount of meetings under the condition of being co-present in a room that we had before. Even though I totally agree, I would love to sit together with you in Moscow or somewhere else in the world to have this kind of discussion. My second one is a question to Andrei. This is more or less a tentative question. I'm curious. You mentioned that Biden is and I totally agree, is an advocate of a liberal world order. But do you think that under President Joe Biden, that he will rebuild the relations with Europe? And the second question is, you talked a lot about the US-Russia relations. Can you at least share some thoughts about the Russia-US and Russia-EU relations? So you talked always about the relations viewing the US and then looking to Russia. And could you at least share some thoughts about the other way around, about Russia and the relations to the US, or Russia and the relations to the EU? Thank you.
Should I answer? Martin had two questions. The first one was for Jan Scholte. Please.
Well,
No, go ahead.
The first
Andrei.
was actually just a.
I think it was a comment more. But Andrei, if I could add to Martin's question, when you discuss the Russian views of the United States, is there one Russian view, or is when you describe the American views of Russia, we see competing views? Is there also on the Russian side competing views of what the United States is or would be?
Definitely. That's partly also in response to Martin's question. Just as the United States has multiple images of Russia, these are images of Russia rival, but they're still different images. Russia has different images of the United States, and there is a broader diversity of those images in Russia than of Russia in the United States, in the sense that not all Russian groups within the establishment view the United States as a rival, and certainly not all minority of those views of those perspectives view the United States as the existential threat. Some do, but the predominantly the United States is viewed as a difficult but an important partner in global order, in the future international system. The United States is viewed as a major revisionist power, particularly after the end of the Cold War, mainly because of the United States foreign policies, beginning with not even intervention in Iraq, but beginning with Yugoslavia at the end of the 90s. This is what really fundamentally changed the perception of the official Russia and the predominantly of Russian political class about future prospects of relationships with the United States. And I should always mention things that you're also well aware of, the expansion of NATO, constant insistence on Russia dealing predominantly with its own domestic problems, denying Russia its own interests in the former Soviet Union and other regions. Each time when Russia would raise the issue of those interests, it would be perceived as a new imperial power, as a power that wants to revive the old Soviet ambitions and Soviet glories. Each time Russia would raise the issue of integration in the former Soviet Union, in Eurasia, politicians in the United States, such as Hillary Clinton, Senator McCain, and many others would say, well, we have seen this before. This is just a fig leaf for Russia's imperial ambitions. Whatever Russia does with respect to Europe, whatever Russia does with respect to Eurasia, is no more than an attempt to revive the Soviet Union. That's the kind of zero-sum perception that exists in the American perception of Russia. And unfortunately, there are schools in Russia that also view the United States as an existential threat. They believe that they cannot get along with the United States, that the United States is always the power that seeks to dominate. It has this built in its DNA, so to speak, the idea that it will rule the world, it will dominate the world. And therefore, the dialogue, the room for dialogue shrinks. There is no space for dialogue when there is such a polarization and politicization. And the more political, economic, and security disagreements we will have, the more likely we will have this kind of nationalist hegemonic voices dominating in both countries. But in Russia, you still have a relatively broad divergence of perspectives, and you still have openness for dialogue, including in the Kremlin, mainly because there is a greater understanding that so much depends on the United States' role with respect to international security, with respect to energy and cyber security. So what you see is a constant attempt on part of Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov and others to reach out, to propose all kinds of new initiatives. Even during most difficult times, Russians continue to propose, for example, most recently, Putin proposed the idea of signing a non-interference pact. I think he initiated this idea only a week ago. And of course, it was a non-starter in the US context. It wasn't even properly presented in US media. But the idea is to go back to the older proposals on cybersecurity, to ultimately sit down and negotiate a pact of non-interference in cybersphere, in political sphere. And that would, in principle, address all these complaints on part of the United States that Russia is out there in our political space, changing our political environment, or even changing our presidents, as many Democrats would claim. So short answer is that, yes, there is diversity of views in both countries, but in Russia, it's a greater diversity in part because there is a greater appreciation that the world must be renegotiated with the United States' role in it, but not as a country that sets the rules and determines conditions for cooperation. Martin also asked about Russia European relations, right? Whether or not, well, actually it was about Biden's perception of Europe, and specifically what Biden might do if he's elected, whether or not he will be able to revive the old alliance like relationships that Barack Obama used to have. I would expect him to certainly move in this direction. I would expect him to try to revive the old transatlantic connection. And as long as you have political leaders such as Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron in power, it will be at least partially reciprocated. So we will have an attempt to revive the old US-led liberal, as they call it, liberal world order in the European context. But unfortunately, it will only, unfortunately for those who want this, it will only be partially successful, only partially simply because the world has changed. For these 4 years that has passed with Donald Trump being the president, Europe has changed as well. Europe has gone through multiple new developments. I'm not the one to tell you about these developments. You know this much better than I do. Migration crisis is one of them. So Europe politically is changing as well. The relationships with Russia has exacerbated now beyond the previous points, particularly with the so-called Navalny crisis. So it will be fundamentally difficult to go back to the old type of relationships without Russia's participation, without reviving Russia's role in Russia-Europe relationships. And it will not be bilaterally successful, even though Biden will try. That would be my assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. Next question, Professor Martin Geiger, please.
Yeah, it was actually more a comment. So what we saw on the migration kind of crisis and afterwards, I think it's important to note that following the migration crisis, let's say, the Global Compact on Migration was actually agreed on, and it was a major step forward, and it was very, very hard to achieve that because it was almost, destroyed this whole idea by actually Donald Trump becoming the president and actually then withdrawing support and others then also dropping out. And I think it's very important to note in this context that China actually was one of the countries that both adopted or helped actually adopting the Refugee Compact and the Migration Compact. And I've talked about this in this chapter with the new book Piotr Dudkiewicz and Janat Schulte edited together. So I think there is actually something going on in this global migration kind of order or disorder. And so a lot of developments are taking place. And what we currently see is actually, yes, we would all agree here in this round to meet in person again as quickly as possible. And I mentioned that actually there is now, there will be more stratifications and more categories of people that might flow, that might travel, even because they might be more privileged actually to have the travel privilege to travel, to have special permits, to have access to a vaccine, to have actually access to perhaps a specific passport or type of travel document. And it will not be a more fair migration order. It's actually leading to, right now, this game changer. Corona crisis is actually a game changer in that sense that I do not expect that there's any progress made in the next few decades, probably, towards a more just global migration order, because it's actually a very tumultuous process now, and each country will start and step and try to really step in as quickly as possible. And what we see, for example, Piotr, you know that very well, in Canada, our provinces are overburdened with debt now, and Canada is going more and more into debt. So at some point, there will be drastic cuts on infrastructure, on innovation, on research, on all kinds of activities. Is Canada then still an attractive country for talent to relocate? Probably not. And there are other talent destinations then emerging, perhaps even countries that, let's say, have a very centralist, very ordered approach to talent migration. Let's call it, perhaps examples could include China. On the other hand, we might have countries that have a complete laissez-faire approach. They simply do not care. And what Piotr Dudkiewicz also mentioned, these countries that really want to make business and not now go under complete lockdown, right? So we actually see really like, I think, a changing order or a changing processes that really ultimately will lead to something else, what we didn't have before. And let's not not forget about the US-China struggle right now over technology, over banning this TikTok or WeChat and all these tools and apps. It could be a signal of actually the last few advantages the US still has on the technological front, and China catching up so quickly now. And we have several battles going on at the same time while this coronavirus hit. And as mentioned, China is actually already like 2 steps ahead. The provinces in China, the cities, are discussing how to relaunch economy. They're letting people back. It's actually a country that perhaps has moved very successfully, very quickly out of the crisis through to a very ordered approach, centralist approach to managing this crisis. And the world will be definitely different. And I do not think that the question if Biden or Trump will win will really impact on China that much, because China is already a step ahead. And also in the field of global governance of many issues, including migration and including high-skilled migration, which will be tremendously important for actually economies relaunching and all these transfers. It's really about knowledge in the end, and who has the knowledge and the capacity to actually innovate again. And I think this will be really, it's a real game changer. And one quick question I had to Andre was actually really about this technological struggle that we also currently see. And these, very kind of almost childish attempts of the US administration, let's call it like that, to prevent any more progress of China and more advantages by banning products, by all kinds of things against China. What do you see actually coming out in this next few months? What will the decision who becomes president really impact on that? Or is it probably, it's just going ahead and will just continue to shape our global politics for the next few years to come? Because I think that I might be a proponent to say, yes, it will be continuing, even if Biden is elected, let's say, the competition will continue.
I think it will, Martin. Thank you for your question. I think it will certainly be similar to Biden's attempts to revive the transatlantic security relationships. It will also, at least temporarily, positively affect the technology dimension of these relationships. Biden is less zero-sum motivated, zero-sum thinker with respect to China. You said that it doesn't matter who is elected on China front, whether Biden or Trump, but still most Europeans, particularly in the so-called liberal part, would prefer Biden rather than Trump, in part because Biden would, at least rhetorically, based on what he has to say, would be open to the idea of cooperation with China on technology front, including in the European continent. Right now you have very active efforts on part of the Trump's administration to push China out of European markets, out of global markets, out of Northern American markets when it comes to technology, when it comes to trade. This is likely to slow down, at least, when Biden is in power, but only slow down because we are in a different era of competition. Piotr emphasized the divide between industrial and financial competition, but this will also be financial competition alongside different regions, technological competition. More and more people will be aware of national and regional factors and drivers of this competition. And the United States will change as well. If Biden is to learn lessons from Democrats' defeat in 2016, then the lesson is very basic one, that it's not Putin who elected Donald Trump. It's Americans themselves who had enough with these policies of liberal globalization at the expense of industrial and national technological and financial development. And therefore, Biden will have to press for American interests, including in relations with Europe. He will have to press for limiting some of the role of Chinese capital, Chinese technologies in Europe. And to some extent, it will be a push and pull. It will be a competition between the old global trends and the new national trends. Globalization, if it will continue, if it will have to continue, will have to be far more sensitive to national conditions, far more sensitive to regional technological conditions. And if it is to survive that kind of globalization, it will have to accept diversity, industrial, financial, national, cultural, migration diversity, and in the same time, it will have to discipline countries such as Turkey and others who are not interested in rules. That will be very difficult. I don't know if Biden has the capacity to handle that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. Any questions? We have very limited time, though I think I saw one or two hands raised from the audience. Eka Horbaladze, I saw you raised your hand. Would you like to ask a question or make comment?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm the first year graduate student of Moscow State University. First of all, again, thanks a lot for interesting reports. Actually, I have several questions, but unfortunately, as you mentioned, we don't have enough time. So, if it's possible, I would ask only two questions.
May I ask you to follow? Sorry, Eka. May I ask you to follow the traditional press conference format? So, one journalist, one question.
Well, okay. So my question goes to Professor Stevenkov. You spoke about U.S.-Russian relations and said that it doesn't depend who will become the next president after the elections in November. But regarding to China, as experts say, we should consider the next Cold War between these two countries. So, taking into account your report and everything that you said about U.S.-Russian relations, it would be interesting to hear your attitude, your opinion about the position of Russia. Is it possible to take the equidistant position in the situation if it appears the new Cold War, the Cold War second? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear too well. Is it about Russia's position with respect to China? Was the question about Russia's future policies and attitude towards China, or was it something else?
The question is about a Russian position. If is it possible to take the equidistant position if new Cold War appears?
Artur, did you hear better than I did? Was it about China or something else? I have a trouble hearing here. Maybe it's my local.
Me too. I think it was about China. Yeah.
If it's about China, then it's an easy question to answer that Russia-China relations will only continue to grow and develop based on different considerations, based on politics of the international system and international order, based on the on Eurasia economic and social developments, based on attempts to breach or harmonize, as they put it, two very different regional projects, One Belt, One Road by China and Russia's Eurasian Economic Union, and several other regional initiatives. There is a room, a very considerable room for progress going forward. Chinese also are actively proposing to further develop security relationships, particularly alongside of harmonizing and even integrating Shanghai Cooperation Organization and Collective Security Treaty Organization, because they believe that security relationships between Russia and China are not developed well enough, and simply they do not have the mechanism for addressing serious security threats. It remains to be seen how this will go forward, because Russia also has its own security concerns, its own security perceptions when it comes to developing alliance-based relationships. But security cooperation nevertheless has moved forward. There will be more energy cooperation going forward. So by all accounts, short of alliance, short of military alliance, these relationships will continue to progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. We can take just one more question or comment from our students. I saw John Wei Li, our master degree program student. Wei Li, 1 minute comment or one question? Whatever you prefer.
I have a question to ask. Okay, so I'm Chinese. I've heard quite quite a lot about China. So I actually have a question to Professor Martin Geiger, because I have heard quite a lot about your comment on China. And my first question is, as you mentioned about talent and mobility, I think I don't know much in this sphere. And in China, we've always had this discussion that China, like too many Chinese educated people have flown to other countries like United States, Canada, and it's still happening. But as you mentioned that we actually have, like you just mentioned, China has actually attracted more talents. Like that to me is kind of like surprising, because it's very different from what we've been talking about in China. Can I ask another question? Okay, my second question is that, I've heard you, and it's actually my personal question, and me and my friends, we've talked quite a lot about it, because just in this 1 week or 2 weeks, this Taiwan issue with in China, it's like very hot in China. I would say that as a Chinese, I'm super scared of those real conflicts. So I would say that like as a Chinese, we aren't very scared of a trade war, but like if it's something real, like a hot war, like I guess like we haven't been through, or like we haven't thought about that, and like many of the Chinese people, I guess mostly young people, would be really scared. So I want to ask you about like, is it from your perspective, is it like possible for like the hot war to happen? So like this is a little bit personal question from my perspective, because I was talking with my friends about this before.
Okay, thank you, Wei Li. So please, Martin.
Yeah, I think I can address definitely the first one, and perhaps the other one is really to the panel, because they are more specialists on IR and than me do what I do. But first question, totally right. So there is always this discussion in China, obviously, about people leaving and so on. However, what's very interesting, and I think we should really underline that 5 times, it's approximately 80% of all the people that have left China over the last few decades have returned to China. Mm-hmm. That is amazing if you compare that globally. It is a huge achievement, and that has happened because China had this very significant economic development, provides a lot of incentives for people to return. Right, so you had the talent programs addressed to Chinese nationals to return to China. And the next stage was actually a launch of many talent programs across China, including at the city level. And here's another thing I learned and was very interesting in it. You have a competition between cities in China. So Shanghai is often piloting initiatives, and then actually other cities and the central government actually taking this over. But China has only since recently a national level coordinating body, the National Immigration Administration, which was just created, I think 2018. So this actually breaks with our idea always about China being totally centralized and everything to the top. It actually has a strong element of city, state, and provincial level jurisdiction, and actually trying, testing approaches. So most cities now that are at the forefront of technological innovation in China have their own talent programs, their own visa programs, one-stop office for bringing people back. And right now what you see is obviously it's relaunching. So there's a process, right? it was at the beginning really difficult for a lot of CEOs and so on to return. A lot of companies lost their personnel. These people had difficulties to return, but now China is actually doing that, allowing for the return of, and they start really from the top and go gradually probably down, and we're going to see more to come next year, but this is definitely happening. And well, the only issue is now in terms of data, of course, this population we are talking about is infinitesimal small because of the huge population China has, obviously, right? But it really matters for innovation in a lot of cities like Shenzhen, like Guangzhou, like Shanghai. A lot actually depends on people returning that are Chinese, plus foreign talents that come in and have been coming in over the last few years. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your reply. And any final comments from our speakers? Does anyone like to make final comments, or we will conclude? Well, if there are no more, oh, sorry.
No, I was only going to say it's been a wonderful exchange, and I'm sorry that we cannot, what we would normally do, now walk into the room next door and have a cup of tea and chat further.
That's what we all miss. I would like to thank all our speakers for time, for preparing your presentations and making your presentations, for the time you spent with us. And we spent more than 2 hours that we were expected to spend. And given the fact that our speakers are located across 10 time zones, from Moscow to San Francisco, and I would like to thank all the guests.
You disappeared again.
Yes.
It was wonderful meeting you, everyone.
My sound disappeared.
Thank you very much.
I would like to thank also our students for being with us and asking questions, very attentively participating in the discussion. And special thanks to Professor Piotr Dudkiewicz for building this wonderful team of speakers today. Our roundtable was recorded, and the video will be available at the page where roundtable was announced. So you all got the link to the page with the announcement of our roundtable. So maybe in a couple of days or even hours, the video will be available. So those students who had no chance to be with us for today can watch video recording. And also thanks a lot to Elina Faizulina for technical assistance, and see you all again at Moscow State University, not only virtually, but in person when we have a chance to travel. Academic exchanges will resume, and we can meet again at the Department of Political Science of Moscow State University. Please stay healthy and safe, and goodbye.
Thank you, Artur, and thank you and my colleagues. Grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.